So I want to continue to report on the Charlie Kirk fallout, but before we get into that, I do want to cover some other news stories because I know that I've been hyper focused on everything with Charlie Kirk and really trying to understand all of the different allegations and connections and theories that are out there surrounding his shooting last Wednesday. So in terms of other updates, I've seen that Pam Bondi has gone on some podcast and she was basically talking about hate speech and how they're going to come after people who are basically saying things that we don't like and make sure that they get legally penalized for what they're saying. So a lot of people had pushed back against this and they pointed to Charlie Kirk's own word where he said that hate speech does not exist, it's not a thing, protect free speech basically, right? And so a lot of people have said, this is the sitting attorney general, she should not have said anything like this, she should know the rules and the laws of our country and know that this is not the appropriate thing to say. And so a lot of people are pushing back on this, and I believe that she came out later in the day when this podcast aired and she basically said that she meant that speech that incited violence is what they were going to go after. And so we'll just keep an eye on that and see how that situation turns out. The other story that I've seen, in addition to other shootings that have happened, I did see the story where 1 or 2 people were found dead and they were said to have been hanging. And so obviously when you hear something like that, in one story I heard the term lynch first instead of hanging, and so those have 2 different connotations. And so we did have this black on white crime with Irina Zaruska, we had what happened with Charlie and that was a white on white crime, and then now we're seeing kind of other shootings happening. So we're not seeing a reduction in gun violence after something as tragic as what happened to Charlie Kirk. We're still seeing people resorting to using guns to solve their issues instead of having conversation and trying to have open debates. Then on top of that, we have these kind of unrelated situations where black people, minorities are found dead and we don't really know the situation. So with the one kid, I think his name is Trey Reed, they said that there was no foul play, but his autopsy is still pending, and so we'll see how that turns out because it is very scary if that is a situation connected to race. I'm not 100% sure of all of the details, but definitely a lot of concerning stuff happening. We are definitely seeing more of a divide than ever instead of people coming together and really trying to bridge the gaps and eliminate all of this craziness. And that's what I was really speaking to in a few of my last videos, where I was really talking about how we need to come together and not really focus so much on left versus right. And I know that some people are not willing to kind of cross those barriers because they feel like there is no uniting or coming together with people who hate them, right? And so I watched a really good video yesterday and was talking about this psych op basically where you're seeing all of this stuff on social media and it's an algorithm and it's making you see the fringes of society and thinking that that is every person, and then that leads to you basically dehumanizing the person who doesn't agree with you, the person who doesn't share your values, and then it makes it so easy to laugh or celebrate when something like what happened to Charlie Kirk happened. And he was talking about the downside of that and how you really have to understand, hey, this is social media, is pushing a certain agenda, is pushing me to see certain videos, and realize that that's not the entire world. And I actually realized that because online I'm seeing a lot of craziness, but when I go out into the real world, like when I leave my house, I don't really see anyone talking about Charlie Kirk. I don't really see any protests. I don't see anything crazy. Like I see that stuff in the news and on social media, but it almost seems like in a really bizarre way that life has continued on as normal in the real world when you leave your house, when you get outside. And so that is an interesting dynamic, and that really speaks to the power that social media has. And the other news story that I saw was that MTG, she's calling for a national divorce. And this was something that I kind of alluded to in one of my videos on basically this divide that we're seeing. I think I talked about this maybe in relation to Nick Fuentes. I can't recall what happened exactly. Maybe it was the Irina Zaruska stabbing. I'm not 100% sure. But basically I was saying that I don't want to see the country divided into left and right, like literally the country split in the middle where people live on one half of the country and then the others live on the other half of the country and all of that stuff. Obviously that's really weird, right? But that's basically how I envision the divide happening. And so basically what they were saying is, like we have the blue states and then we have the red state, and then they were talking about like, hey, if you go from a blue state to a red state, there should be a cooling off period or something like that. And so there's a lot of craziness that is being discussed in terms of not necessarily bridging the gaps, but furthering the divide, which is really scary because, again, I don't want to experience a civil war. I don't want to live in a country that is completely divided to where in one state things are done in a completely different way and then in another state things are opposite of that, right? That's really crazy. Like, across the board, we should be living very similar lives with a few minor differences, and so having a national divorce is something that's really crazy to me. Like, obviously we know that when the North was against the South and what that led to, I don't want to see something like that happen because I don't know if we go to a civil war, I don't know that we'll be able to fight it out and then come together again. And so it's just really scary, and I don't want to dig too much into that because I don't want to kind of give that energy, but I also think it's important to mention it in this video because that is kind of like a worst case scenario when you have to go to this type of measure if you don't think that you can truly get everyone on the same page. And so this goes back to dehumanizing people who don't think the way that you do, and then also believe in whatever anyone says about the people that you don't agree with, because there's a lot of people, again, saying that Charlie Kirk is a white supremacist, but a lot of people are also saying that that's not true, and you can point to his videos, his debates, and all of that stuff that really affirm that. And there was one thing that I saw that was basically saying that he didn't believe that race exists, like he thought that was a social construct and all of that stuff. And so, again, if you don't believe in race, you can't really be racist, right? And so there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's on you to sift through that, dig through that to figure out what the truth is for yourself. And speaking of Charlie Kirk, I was watching a video from Stabby Stabs, and she was basically talking about how somebody proposed the Charlie Kirk Act and basically holding media companies, holding influencers, content creators accountable for what they say and promoting propaganda. And that would be really crazy because I know that a lot of people now, we hear a news story and we kind of speculate and we say whether or not we agree with the narrative and all of that stuff. So that could potentially be seen as propaganda. Like, it kind of eliminates the discussion around whatever the official narrative is. And I don't know if that's a good thing because it sounds like you can only accept whatever someone else says, what they deem the truth to be, and there's really no discussion allowed about that. And that's really scary because we all use social media to kind of discuss what we think is happening, what we think about the news, how we perceive it, how we feel about it. If that is going to be seen as propaganda, if you voice an opinion different from whatever the government, mainstream media tells you, that is a little bit scary. And so I will be keeping an eye on that just to see kind of how that turns out, what happens, and if that gets passed. But then there's also the idea of, again, Charlie Kirk was not against hate speech. He thought that that didn't exist. He thinks that free speech is something that we should protect. And so when you have people's words being censored in that way, it is very scary because we have always lived in this society where we can say whatever we want, really, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're free from consequences. There are social consequences to the things that you do and say, especially online and in the real world. And then for some of those things that you say, there are legal consequences. And so I don't know how I feel about content creators being held to the standard. You should still have communities, online communities, where you can discuss the news, where you can talk about opposing opinions or differing opinions. And if you have this kind of restriction, that kind of makes that all go away. And it just seems like it really should not be that way. And then moving on to the other news updates. So Jimmy Kimmel, his show has been taken off of air, and I do have a clip that I want to play. And basically what is happening with his show is that he basically did a monologue where he was talking about the Charlie Kirk situation. And obviously his whole thing is to make light of a situation, but the FCC, they said that they have this standard of fair and accurate reporting, if I am quoting that correctly, and then also making sure that whatever you say is in the public interest. And so he is getting taken off of air because of whatever he said in that monologue. So we can just go ahead and play that clip.
Over the weekend, with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. Okay. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction. Demolition, construction. This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns.
Okay, so that's the end of that clip. And I thought that the second half was kind of funny because he's actually making a joke of something that we can see with our eyes, and we can see that that's a weird response to the question that was asked. So I think that that part of it is fair, even if it is in bad taste to kind of make fun of the situation that that kind of moment is stemming from or the result of. But it was the first part that's kind of more problematic, because I think that it would have been different if he said, hey, this is the facts, this is what they're reporting about the shooter, and then you kind of go into, well, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that sort of conversation, right? And so if you have not been paying attention, you don't really know anything about the shooter, the person who was arrested for the killing of Charlie Kirk, and you just hear what Jimmy Kimmel said, you may take that at face value without realizing that that's not actually what's been reported. And so I think there is a distinction definitely between, one, making sure that people know, hey, this is what's being said, this is my opinion on it, versus just leading with your jokes and not really making sure that the audience knows that, hey, this is a joke, this is me speculating, or this is me pushing a intentional narrative to cause further divide, right? And so I think there's multiple ways to look at how this clip is being perceived, but it does go back to this idea that you should be able to share a different opinion. But again, I think what they were saying with this clip in particular is that the facts are already reported based on what the FBI, the investigation produced, and then this is what he led with, or this is what he told his audience. And so I can see, one, how this is offensive and probably not the best type of joke to make in this situation, and then I can also see the concerns with people believing this if they don't know anything else about the shooter and they only heard what Jimmy Kimmel said. And this leads me to the question of, when is it okay to question the official narrative? When is it okay to have your own opinion, your own thoughts on what is happening, and what is the clear distinction between you having a different opinion and then you just kind of spreading your own narrative and kind of trying to sway people in a different direction regardless of what the truth is? Like, what is the distinction? What is the difference between those two things? Okay, so getting into the rest of this episode, everyone wants Candace to produce her receipts on what she is saying about Charlie Kirk. And this has been a super confusing situation because a lot of people are saying, hey, she's grifting, she's using this opportunity to cash in on her friend's death and all of that stuff. And I don't really get this kind of criticism because, one, she's basically responding to other people's words about Charlie Kirk and kind of defending him, defending the relationship, and defending what she knows or thinks she knows about the situation. I think it's very different if he had passed away, if he had been assassinated, and then she just came out of nowhere, basically telling this narrative or this version of events, and it wasn't her reacting to somebody else. Here, she's really reacting to Netanyahu and the speech that he gave and what other people have said, and so she's saying, hey, this is actually not the truth. And I think it's also different if we didn't have many clips of Charlie Kirk kind of expressing his, dilemma that he was in terms of really supporting Israel, the Holy Land, and then also kind of criticizing the government, AIPAC, and all of that stuff, right? And so the clips that I've seen of Charlie talking about Israel and all of that stuff, it kind of supports more of what Candace is saying in terms of, hey, there was an actual conflict here. It's not all roses and everything is gravy, right? So she's pointing to what Charlie Kirk himself has kind of made obvious. And so I don't think it's necessarily fair to say, hey, you're an opportunist, you're making this all about yourself, when there's kind of little seeds of doubt that have already been planted by Charlie Kirk himself. And so I don't think it's fair to say, hey, this is not your place to bring up these conversations or to have this discussion. It's a bad time and all of that stuff, because really she's doing this in reaction, I feel, to what other people have said. Now, I did not see this interview or this discussion in its full context, but I did see that someone from TP USA on their board of directors, he went on to the PBD podcast, and he was basically saying, hey, they don't have a relationship, or they used to have a relationship, they fell out, she's gone too far down the rabbit hole, all of this stuff. and then saying that she maybe didn't have a relationship with Erica Kirk. And so I found this super interesting because what exactly is it that she's doing that's going too far down the rabbit hole? Because just to recap, we know that when October 7th happened, she came out, she made the comment about the genocide, and then she started getting a lot of backlash. But prior to that, I don't really remember her, or maybe I'm just not remembering that she had this kind of like vendetta or this mission to go after Jewish people in Israel and all of that stuff. So I don't really remember that happening prior to October 7th. And then again, it was really her making that statement, genocide should not be okay, or whatever it was she said, because I don't have the full quote word for word. Let me actually just look that up. Okay, so I have a news article pulled up from November 5th, 2023. Basically what she said, no government anywhere has a right to commit a genocide ever. There's no justification for a genocide. I can't believe this even needs to be said or is even considered the least bit controversial to state. So I don't know if she tweeted all of that on Twitter, but this is what is quoted in the article as what she said. And so I don't think there's anything problematic about that, but I think that was really kind of the start of the criticisms of Israel, the government, and all of that stuff. And so getting back to what this person said on the PBD podcast, so he's really pointing to the fact that, hey, there's no relationship here, and if there was still a relationship, she would probably be the heir to the TPUSA throne, which I thought was super interesting because who is Charlie Kirk's right-hand man at TPUSA? You would think that somebody within the organization would be the heir to the TPUSA throne. I don't really like the idea of all of these outside people coming and doing guest appearances on his show. It should really be kept in-house with the TPUSA people. But again, I also think that it's also tainted now with all of this conversation and all of this discussion about what his real kind of relationship was with the government of Israel and AIPAC and his donors at the time of his assassination. And then also Adam, he spoke about Candace, and he was really questioning whether or not they were still friends, and so I'm going to play this clip.
Ironically, a couple days before October 7th. Show me any evidence that they've been in touch, they've been in dialogue, they've done anything together. I would love to see it.
Okay, I want to pause it here because I find it interesting that we need physical proof of someone's relationship. Obviously, we live on social media where people take pictures, there's videos, they're documenting their lives online, but I also don't think that that is proof of a friendship. You don't have to post everything online or for there to be a kind of a physical trail in the sense of showing off your life to social media. I don't think that that's proof of friendship. You can have a friendship with someone without that being kind of plastered everywhere online. So I get why he's asking for this, but at the same time, having a picture with someone or being in the same room as someone is not what's proof of a relationship. Because you know how some people, if they don't see each other for a while and they meet up again for the first time in a year or something like that, some people say, hey, it's we never parted and we're just getting back into our natural rhythm and all of that stuff. Whereas other people, they say that, hey, we met after a year and it was really awkward, we didn't really know what to say to each other and all of that stuff. And so I think only really Candace and Erica can speak to what their relationship is. Obviously there are other people who may have witnessed things, and so they're free to speak up in my opinion, but I don't think that having a picture or an interview together is the only sign of whether or not someone is actually friends with whoever is being discussed. And so we can continue playing.
So they were friends. I don't think they are friends. I think that Candace is capitalizing on Charlie's death. I think she feels horrible. She doesn't feel good about this.
So I want to pause it here because it's interesting because she's implying that they fell out because of her comments regarding what happened on October 7th. And I find that super interesting because there is a clip of Charlie Kirk talking about what happened on October 7th, I think, as well. And so if what he said in that clip is accurate, I'll add the clip in if I can find it. But if he is saying, hey, I have questions about what happened on October 7th, and then Candace also has questions, that's not something that they would have, I guess, been feuding over if they were kind of following the same train of thought. So I thought that was interesting that he's basically trying to say or implying that they fell out because of what she said in terms of her reaction to October 7th. Okay, so that's the end of the clip. And then I also want to bring up, there is this other clip that is circulating, and it's basically Charlie at, I guess, like a conference or an event, and he's being asked a question about Candace and basically people who are anti-Israel and all of that stuff. And from the clip that I saw, they're basically saying, oh, he called Candace Owens demonic, and that's actually misleading, because if you listen to the entire clip, you can see that he said, I'm not going to debate Candace, because that's the guy, the question included, hey, would you debate Candace or any of these people, and kind of set the narrative straight or whatever. And so he said, no, I'm not going to debate Candace. And so why is he not going to debate Candace? Because that's his friend, because he doesn't want to touch that situation. What is it? Trail of thinking there, right? And then he also goes on and he said, you know, there's basically like a fringe corner of the internet who's blaming the Jewish people for all of their problems. And so that's not the exact wording that he said, but that's basically what he's getting at. And so he's pointing to this other group of people who's not talking about Candace specifically. I think they are conflating the two and saying, hey, you know, he called Candace demonic and he didn't actually do that. But I think from what I've seen of him in terms of Israel and Jewish people, he is really against anti-Jewish hate. And so I think he was speaking more about that, but it wasn't necessarily anything about Candace, because again, he said, I'm not going to debate Candace, so he's setting a clear boundary there, but then he's also addressing the guy's question, which was about Candace and other people. So I think he's really speaking on a group of people, not necessarily Candace in that instance. So you can watch the clip and see for yourself what your thoughts are on his response to that question. Okay, so getting back to Candace, so I've been seeing a lot of tweets on social media, and I'm 100% confused about this, because I don't know, because the tweet that I saw basically said, oh, hey, she's going to put her screenshots or her messages with Charlie Kirk or whoever else, like her sources, right? She's going to put that behind a paywall and try to monetize it. And I looked on her website and I couldn't see anything, so I don't know if that was just people trolling and saying, hey, you know, she's grifting, this is what she's going to do, or if they're saying that she actually did that. So I was confused. And from what I can find, that has not happened yet. And so hopefully she does release her evidence, her screenshots, whatever, because a lot of people are saying, okay, at this point you need to release whatever you have, because other people have shown their screenshots, and some of their screenshots aren't really helpful. They don't really prove anything. And so it's just really confusing. So I do think at this point she does need to reveal whatever she had. And that was a criticism that Nick had in his show from last night, where basically she did, I think, 2 or 3 episodes now on Charlie Kirk and what happened. And then basically she came out on Twitter and said, hey, you know, I never said that Israel was involved in what happened to Charlie Kirk. And so I do agree that she didn't say that, but she also kind of opened the door to that line of thought by saying, hey, you know, actually your relationship wasn't that good, blah, blah, blah. So naturally people are going to speculate, oh, did they have something to do with it? And so her response to Netanyahu and all of these other people does open the door to people thinking that Israel had something to do with this. And then in terms of her grifting and her ads, I find this super weird. Like, I don't know why people would expect her not to read ads during her show. She's always done that. And I've seen a few ads where they are in relation to Charlie Kirk and donating to TPUSA or whatever, right? And so I think it's weird to expect someone not to do their normal routine. Candace is covering this like any other story that she would cover. And there is a personal connection there, but I don't think that has any connection to the ads, because I wouldn't expect someone to not read ads if that's what I know them to do. I don't think that she's doing this for views, because I saw one tweet where it was a screenshot of her saying, oh wow, 270 people live, whatever. Obviously that's a huge impressive number, and people are coming to watch because, one, they know that she has an association or a connection to Charlie Kirk, and then they're also invested in hearing whatever they can about Charlie Kirk, right? And so I don't think that's her being an opportunist. If she truly believes, hey, you know, they're lying, blah, 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 fine, fair to say it, whatever, but you also need to produce your evidence so that you can back up what you're saying. So I do agree with Nick saying, like, hey, you know, at this point you need to show your evidence. I don't necessarily like people saying, hey, you know, don't do X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to show my tweets or whatever. You should just show your tweets. Like, if you have proof, you don't even need to wait for people to do something before you release it. Just release it. That's my stance on that. And so hopefully she does come out with evidence soon, or I think people will lose a little bit of credibility in what she has to say because it's taken her so long to produce evidence. I will say that I don't like how she prices her merch, and so she did have a new line of t-shirts up, and it was basically the CIA logo, and Central Intelligence Agency was Candace Intelligence Agency, and I think the t-shirt was like $35 and the sweatshirt was like $60. That is way overpriced. In my opinion, it should really be like $20 and $25, something like that, and so I don't like seeing stuff like that because that makes me not want to buy that t-shirt or that sweatshirt, and I was considering it, but I'm like, I'm not going to pay $60 for a sweatshirt. Like, this is not Louis Vuitton gear or t-shirts, right? And so the prices for her merch is a little bit ridiculous, and so that's the point that I will concede on. Like, yeah, you need to lower the prices for your merch. Okay, switching gears, I want to go into Charlie Kirk and his focus group because, again, I did watch the debate with Josh Hammer and Dave Smith, and I didn't see anything crazy in there. He moderated the debate. He let this discussion happen. Two opposing sides. I thought it was a really good debate, but I didn't see anything super concerning there. That could just be me not catching like the little stuff that maybe I should have caught when watching it. But I thought that his focus group was a little bit more telling because, one, it was him asking kind of leading questions, and he was saying, I've been telling them, like, this is going to lead to an earthquake, blah, blah, blah. They don't believe me. And so it sounds like he's trying to really say, hey, this is a problem. We need to address this, blah, blah, blah. And then they're not taking him seriously for whatever reason. And who is they? Who is he telling this to? And so I do want to play a clip from that focus group just to kind of explain what I mean by leading question. And we can go from there.
Is articulated by a lot of young people and held by a lot of young people. Because let's now take a step back and let's now broaden it. How many of you guys think when a lawmaker, and a man I respect like Ted Cruz, uses the Bible to justify aid to Israel, doesn't even know the verse, do you guys think that's like not the best way to approach this? Raise your hand. Okay.
I think Ted Cruz used Genesis 12:3. I think a lot of people see that as off-putting when you look at the New Testament.
Why?
Because
I'm going to pause it there because that's kind of a leading question. Like, he's saying, basically, who thinks that's not the best way to handle it? Like, that's kind of like a leading question. So I'm going to keep playing.
Because I think a lot of people, they look especially at the writings of Paul, where he talks about how the new flesh is not the same as the people in the old covenant. The new flesh is everybody, is everyone's included.
You're talking about Romans 9?
Yes, 9:6, yeah.
Are you Catholic?
Converting a Catholic from Judaism.
I can tell.
This is my next
Oh, from Judaism?
Yes.
Oh, wow. So you're you're ethnically Jewish.
Ethnically Jewish, yes.
And you have concerns about AIPAC.
Yes, I do.
I'm told that by some people that if I criticize AIPAC, I'm anti-Semitic.
I think it's...
Okay, I'm going to pause it because you can see the guy's face when he starts with that question. He kind of looks down, he's like, oh God, not this again, or something like that. So you can see that the conversation here is kind of, I guess, in shaky territory is how I would say it. Like, he's wanting to have this conversation and he's, like, I guess, forcing the issue because nobody would believe him that he thinks that this is an issue. But I just thought that the reaction from the person sitting next to him was a little bit weird.
Anti-Semitic.
I think it's ridiculous, yeah. I feel like it's great to have a concern for your country.
Do you think that that AIPAC represents, again, I'm not saying I believe this, but I think this is what you're saying, that it represents a kind of cutting in line of prioritization away from the American people?
Yes.
Would you guys say that's a fair summary?
100%.
Meaning that, like, okay, we vote, we're citizens, but a separate group gets higher priority because of whatever reasons. You look like you want to chime in.
That the entirety of the idea of a PAC is to represent a group, but the fact that we're allowing a group that doesn't even represent American interests to influence the people who are supposed to be representing us, I have a huge problem with. And that's why I've said this before, and a lot of people don't like when I say it. I actually think there's probably like 20 representatives between Senate and House who I think are actually fully doing the work of the American people and don't have the interests of some group pulling their sway. But when you hear that lots of other countries also are lobbying, do you think,
So I'm going to pause it here, and that's the end of a clip. And so I think that this is a really interesting conversation because there's a lot of people who think this about AIPAC. So it's not like he's introducing a question that nobody has ever thought of. Like, you should already have your talking points and how you want to counteract this or whatever. So it's not like this should be, oh my God, this is not a question that I think should be super alarming because it's not like he is putting this idea in other people's heads. They already think it, you know what I mean? So it's your job at this point to either change people's thinking of that or do things in order for other people to receive AIPAC differently, right? And so you're getting mad at people for thinking this, but like obviously what else are they going to think if they are not aligned with whatever is happening, right? And so I can understand why this might be perceived as being against Israel, but I think as an American citizen, you do have a right to ask questions like this. And I think this is really pointing to wanting to separate Israel and America and saying, hey, I'm American. I might have a interest in making sure that you're protected or making sure that the Holy Land is protected, but you can't use that to trample all over my rights as an American. And so I think it's really that distinction that is being made between, yes, I support Israel, but I'm also an American, and you can't really tell me what to do or tell me what to think. I think that's kind of the energy here that I've seen kind of in this debate or in this focus group, the debate with Dave Smith and Josh Hammer, and then a few other clips that I've seen, especially the one with Megyn Kelly that I played, where he's saying, I'm sorry, I'm an American. So there's this distinction here that even though you're really trying to intertwine the two countries, we're actually two separate countries with our own interests, and you need to basically remember that. And so I think that that's a fair point to make, and he should be able to make that point, and then you have an open discussion about it. And if you don't know how to resolve that or address that or kind of change people's minds, that's the problem. That's not a Charlie Kirk problem or anybody else's problem. It's just what the narrative is, what people think, right? Alrighty, so that was the last clip that I wanted to play, and so I wanted to make sure that I could address some of these things I'm seeing on social media, and I do still plan to watch the Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk interview. I have not been able to get to that yet, and so I do want to make a video on that and just see what I learned from that interview, especially since Tucker Carlson is wrapped up in this whole conversation on really trying to understand Charlie Kirk's frame of mind and what his relationship was with Israel at the time of his passing. And I also want to watch a recent episode of Uncensored. We had Jeffree Star up there and Amazing Lucas, and I've been seeing some of Amazing Lucas's videos, and I just kind of want to see how that dynamic goes in a panel format where people are discussing Charlie Kirk and all of the reactions and all of that stuff to it. And then I also think that a unanswered question is, it seems like from the conversations that we've been having, it seems like people have cleared Bill Ackman and the Hamptons as nothing crazy happened there, so this is pointing to something else. But in that Megyn Kelly interview, he talked about his donors and getting nasty messages basically from other people. So if we've cleared Bill Ackman, then obviously you need to look at his other donors. Who else was he communicating with that would have been pressuring him? That is naturally the next step in this. Okay, you've checked off one name, but you still need to go down the list and kind of figure out what is happening here. Alrighty, so we can go ahead and end this episode. It's 2:14. Hopefully I can get this edited and up soon. I am waiting to see what Candace says on her show tonight. She does have a lot of comments to respond to and allegations to address as far as, does she have the evidence that she says she does? Is she grifting? Is she taking advantage of this opportunity? And all of that stuff. So I will be looking forward to her show later on today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.